You know, it's strange how life can feel perfectly steady one moment, and then the next, everything just shifts beneath your feet. I worked for the same company for 15 years. 15 years of pouring myself into my work, showing up every day, busting my ass to make things better. I wasn't just a number. I was the person everyone came to when things got tough. I was loyal, dedicated, and I truly believed I had a future there. But then, one day, out of nowhere, or so it seemed, I got the call that I was being let go. Just like that. No warning, no chance to say goodbye properly. My boss, who I thought respected me, told me my position was eliminated, effective immediately. It felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. But here's the secret no one knew. I saw it coming. Long before that phone call, I felt the shift happening. I noticed the way my boss started avoiding me, how my workload got quietly trimmed, how emails became curt and meetings stopped including me. It was like watching the slow-motion collapse of something I cared about, and I was powerless to stop it. But I wasn't powerless at all. I was just waiting for the right moment. Let me take you back to the beginning. I joined the company fresh out of college, brimming with ideas and eager to prove myself. The place was like a second home for years. I learned everything: marketing, operations, client relations, you name it. I worked late nights, weekends, holidays sometimes. My boss even called me his right hand at one point. I was proud. For a long time, it seemed like my hard work paid off. I got promotions, raises, respect. I was the guy who kept things running smoothly. But around year 12, things started to shift. New leadership came in. A different vibe settled over the office. I noticed subtle changes. A new assistant hired who started taking over some of my responsibilities. Emails that skipped me. Strategy meetings where I was more observer than participant. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was out of touch. Maybe I wasn't keeping up with the pace. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I felt the creeping unease that something was wrong. Then came the layoffs. The first wave hit a few departments. Rumors spread. I watched colleagues pack their desks and say quiet goodbyes. The company was restructuring, they said, focusing on core business. It was corporate speak for, we're cutting costs, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't worried, yet. I told myself I was valuable, that my years meant something. But when my boss started holding one-on-one meetings with other team members, but not with me, I knew I was in trouble. When I tried to ask about my role, he'd dodge the question or say, we're just figuring things out. One day, I overheard HR talking in the hallway about transition packages and severance. My stomach dropped. I pieced it together. My name was on the list. That was the moment I stopped pretending. I started preparing quietly, cautiously. I updated my resume in secret. I reconnected with old contacts. I documented every project, every success I'd had. I told no one, not even my wife, because I didn't want her to worry. Meanwhile, I started spending nights working on an idea I'd had for years, a project that would later become my escape hatch. I'd been frustrated with how things were done at the company, the outdated systems, the red tape. So I began teaching myself new skills: coding, design, marketing strategies outside the corporate bubble. I was careful. I didn't tell anyone. This was my backup plan, my secret weapon. When the call finally came, my position was eliminated, effective immediately. I wasn't shocked. The words stung, but I was ready. I said goodbye with grace, but inside, I felt a quiet fire burning. Walking out that door, I wasn't defeated. I was reborn. For weeks, I worked like a madman, building that side project into a real business. Freelance clients, friends of friends, social media leads, they all started coming. The little company I'd been dreaming about was taking shape. Then, one day, the unbelievable happened. A former client of my old company reached out to me directly. They were unhappy with their service and wanted to see if I could help. I gave a presentation, a real pitch, and they signed on. That's when I realized something powerful. I wasn't just competing with my old employer. I was winning. Months later, I walked into a pitch meeting where my old boss was sitting across the table. We were competing for the same contract. When the client chose my company, I saw the shock on his face. That moment was a full circle victory, not just for me, but for every person who ever felt discarded. Because losing that job wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything I was truly capable of. If you're watching this and feeling undervalued or out of place, remember, your story isn't over. Sometimes, the darkest moments lead to the brightest new chapters. When I finally walked out of that office, the finality hit me like a freight train. 15 years. All the blood, sweat, and late nights. just evaporated in a single conversation. My boss, who barely looked me in the eye, gave me a nod and said, "We appreciate your work." I think he realized even he didn't believe it. The whole ride home felt surreal. I kept replaying the conversation, searching for some hint I'd missed, some way it could have gone differently. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about performance. This was about a new direction, and I was no longer part of the plan. When I got home, I sat down with my wife and told her everything. She was stunned but calm, maybe calmer than I was. "We'll figure this out," she said quietly. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't alone. I had a partner who believed in me, who was ready to fight. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop, my secret project. What had started as a hobby, a quiet rebellion against the stagnation I felt at work, was now my lifeline. I started building my business with everything I had. Days blurred into nights. I taught myself coding, web design, digital marketing, all the skills I wished I'd had in my corporate job. Every hurdle was a lesson. Every failure was fuel. I remember the first client I landed. It wasn't a huge contract, just a local shop that needed a website. But when they called me weeks later, thanking me for the work, I felt a spark. This was real. I was making something of my own, something that mattered. But it wasn't easy. Bills piled up. The stress weighed heavy. Doubts gnawed at me in the quiet moments. What if this fails? What if I'm not good enough? But each time, I pushed those thoughts aside and reminded myself I'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. One of the hardest parts was facing people from my old life, colleagues who barely hid their surprise when they saw me out and about. Flogs, my old boss, who once dismissed me like I was nothing, now had to take me seriously as a competitor. The first time I landed a client that used to be theirs, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't do it to spite anyone. Honestly, I was too focused on building my dream to waste energy on grudges. But winning that contract was a turning point, a symbol that I was more than just an employee. I was an entrepreneur, a creator, someone who refused to be defined by a dismissal. And then came the day I walked into a boardroom, sitting across from my former boss. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. He looked me up and down, eyes flickering between surprise and something like regret. We were pitching for a big contract, one I never would have imagined chasing before. I stayed calm, presented my vision clearly, showed how my company could deliver better service, faster results, and more innovation. When the client chose me, the room practically shook with disbelief. That victory wasn't just about business. It was a personal triumph over years of being overlooked and undervalued. Looking back, losing that job was a brutal blow, but it forced me to confront my fears and rediscover my worth. It taught me that sometimes, the worst endings lead to the most unexpected beginnings. If you're out there right now feeling discarded, unappreciated, or just plain lost, listen to this. Your value isn't tied to any job or title. You have power inside you, power to reinvent, to fight back, to build something better. So, what's next for me? I'm growing my company every day, learning more, pushing harder, dreaming bigger. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving, and all because I refuse to let one dismissal define my life. Thanks for hearing my story. I hope it reminds you that even when the ground falls away, you can still find solid ground beneath your feet. Keep going. Your best chapter is still ahead. As the months rolled on, my little business kept growing. What started as a side hustle had now become my full-time reality. I went from chasing payments to hiring my first employee, a moment I never thought I'd see so soon. Every client, every project was a reminder that I'd built this from the ground up. But the real test was still ahead. One afternoon, I got a call from a major client, a multinational company that had been with my old employer for years. They were unhappy with the service, and someone had mentioned my name. Suddenly, I was pitching for a contract that I'd once thought was out of reach. The pressure was enormous. I prepared for days, crafting a presentation that was part business proposal, part personal declaration. I wasn't just selling a service. I was proving I was more than the employee they'd fired. When the day came, I walked into the conference room and saw him, my old boss, the man who had dismissed me so coldly, who had once looked at me like I was disposable. His eyes locked on me for a split second, surprise flickering across his face. I held his gaze calmly. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. I was back, and I was a force. The meeting was intense, but I felt grounded. I spoke with conviction, showing how my company could deliver faster, smarter, and more personally than any faceless corporation. When the decision came down, I won. That contract changed everything, not just financially, but mentally. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But beyond the business success, something deeper had shifted inside me. I realized that the years I spent at that company, the late nights, the sacrifices, the quiet disappointments, weren't wasted. They were the foundation I'd built my new life on. And what about my old boss? I never sought revenge, but I won't lie, it felt satisfying to prove him wrong. When he finally reached out months later, asking if I'd consider a partnership, I politely declined. I had my own path now, and it was nothing like the one I'd left behind. Looking back, getting dismissed after 15 years was one of the hardest moments of my life, but it forced me to face the truth. I was capable of so much more than I'd believed. Losing that job wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of the best chapter. To anyone listening who feels lost or discarded, remember this: sometimes, the darkest moments shine a light on your true strength. When one door closes, don't just wait for another to open. Build your own, fight for your worth, and never let anyone else's opinion define who you are. Thank you for listening to my story. If you take anything away from it, let it be this: your potential is limitless, and sometimes, being pushed out is just the universe's way of pushing you forward.